Hello and welcome to Voices of BlueScope, the podcast where we meet the people who work behind the scenes at BlueScope to create strength every day. I'm your host, Martin Feld. Thank you for listening. In this episode, we're introducing you to 4 people from Star BlueScope Steel, a part of the global BlueScope group that is based in Delta, Ohio in the United States. Our guests are Doug Lange, President, Sheri Caldwell, Vice President, Human Resources, Weldon Hull, Engineer in EAF Operations, and Daniel Bridge, Manager in Caster Maintenance. As leaders of the business, Doug and Sheri kindly agreed to give an introduction to the manufacturing site in Delta, Ohio, and how it contributes to local communities. We were also interested to hear about Star's people and its major expansion project, which is currently underway. This involves the construction of an entire second mill that will be adjacent to the existing operational facility, all of which comes with its own important considerations for health, safety, sustainability, and recruitment. Guests Weldon and Daniel gave their time to explain the project and how it fits into operations at the site. First, let's cross to our conversation with Doug. He tells us about his own background and role as president, while providing a comprehensive overview of this significant expansion project and what it means for Star BlueScope Steel.
Star was or is a flat-rolled mini mill that was kind of dreamed up in the late 90s and was constructed in 1996-97 and kind of fired off in late 97, making just one thing really, coils of flat-rolled steel from a basically recycling process, as opposed to, that's what a mini mill is compared to a integrated mill where you would start with iron ore. So Star starts with basically about 75% scrap. So, your car, when it dies and goes away, ends up in a furnace like ours, along with about 20 to 25% pig iron, which is virgin iron units. Originally, we were supposed to make about 1.5 million tons of steel. Before the expansion, we make about 2.3 million tons of steel annually. With the expansion, we'll add about 950,000 tons to that. So I'll call it 3.3 million tons of steel after the expansion. We do that with what originally was about almost 400 people. With the expansion, we're adding about 90 to 95 people to it. So call it 495, just shy of 500 people to make what will be 3.3 million tons of steel per year. It's a very engaged workforce. And when I say that, I underline very engaged workforce that are quite tuned into the success of Star is the success of the employees. Star is successful because of the now almost 500 people that we have working there. We take quite a unique stance on hiring people, and the way we hire people is quite unique in that we're not so much interested in your skills to run a steel mill, but more in your soft skills of initiative, problem solving, problem assessment, teamwork, and the like. That's really, really important to me and to the broader Star team. The background on myself, I'm a farm boy from Nebraska in the middle of the United States and kind of moved around with one of the parent companies, Cargill, who owned part of this for kind of the first 15 years, I guess, or 17 years of its existence. And then we bought the other half in 2015. I'm a finance guy by background, spent time in a bunch of different businesses as, in lead finance roles, and eventually the VP of finance for Star, then did that same job for our buildings business, both here in Kansas City, here in America, and then lived in Shanghai for a few years, and then came back to be involved in this project and eventually to take this job at Star. So very happy to be back.
Now, you mentioned the idea of this expansion project that's happening. What can you tell us about the expansion project itself? What does that mean for the site and what prompted it?
Great question. So big picture, Star is fundamentally a couple of furnaces that melt scrap down to liquid steel. Then we treat it with a ladle furnace and we cast it back to solid steel in a casting machine that then runs into a rolling mill that has 2 roughing stands and 6 finishing stands. That whole process was designed 20 some years ago with the possibility of an expansion in mind. And so we have extra capacity in our rolling mill and have always been thinking about, well, should we add on to the front end? So in other words, put in a new furnace, another furnace, put in another casting machine, and then you create a shuttle that moves that over into the rolling mill to be able to use the existing rolling mill, which has excess capacity. To be honest, we've tried this a couple of different times to get it approved, and because of one thing or another, the timing wasn't right. And part of the other reason was because the North Star team has done such a good job of continuing to make more steel with the existing assets. It makes you wonder, well, why don't we just not do it and wait and see if they can continue to make it better without spending the capital? We kind of got to a plateauing trap and said, well, it's pretty much flat out now, so now is the time to actually do the expansion. So the timing seems good. The workforce was ready, and we've bought the equipment from 3 or 4 different major vendors and are right in the middle of the process of putting it in. It's kind of 2 major parts: to make a heat of steel, and then also to make slabs, which will then be rolled in a rolling mill.
And when did this project kick off?
The technical answer to that is that the board of directors approved it in August of 2019. So it's kind of a 3-year build almost. We had been doing engineering work to figure out, would this work, et cetera, probably for at least 6 months, maybe even a year prior to that. And like I say, we've tried this a couple of other times to see if this is a project that we wanted to do. Yeah, it takes a while to get it approved. So I would say, kind of officially kicked off in August of 2019. 25 years ago, when we hired, kind of 375 people or so, very few of them knew how to make steel, what liquid steel was about, what a casting machine was, et cetera. Today, we have some of the best steel makers in the world and very tuned into how our equipment works, how a mini mill works, what good looks like as far as making steel every day. That's the known now that was a big unknown 20 years ago. So that part really gives you a positive vibe that this will go smoothly. North Star is known not only for having a good workforce, but also for making a product. Our product delivery, our product service offering, and our customer experience is considered one of the best or the best in the industry. And that's measured by a company called Jacobson. Probably 15 of the last 17 years, North Star has won the Jacobson Award for the best flat rolled mill in the country. Because of that, when we think about placing this additional 1 million tons into the marketplace, we're confident that we can leverage that experience that our customers have had. We've spent a lot of time talking to our customers and thinking about who we're actually going to ship these tons to and who's going to buy them. And we're, like I say, leveraging that experience of a quality experience from a customer standpoint as we think about what's the best home for these tons as we fire this thing up. We're very conscious of the fact that we have to bring in an additional 1 million to 1.1 million tons of steel, of scrap raw materials, to be able to feed the beast, if you will, to make this work. That's all part of the plan as well.
Thank you so much for your time, Doug. It's been fantastic to get this insight into North Star and the site and the project. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Martin. Just fantastic talking to you.
Now let's turn to Sheri. As Vice President Human Resources, she shares her own experience and grants us an insight into the wide-ranging initiatives that take place internally and externally, even touching the lives of veterans and the elderly.
So currently, I am the Vice President of Human Resources at North Star BlueScope Steel, and I've been here for about 2 years, and I was at an agricultural company prior for about 7 years, and have really enjoyed the transition. I currently manage many different functions within HR, but when you think about HR, it's everything you would typically think of, in terms of hiring and training and development and compensation and benefits and pretty much you name it. If it falls under HR, then it's my team and myself who manage the function.
And how has that experience been moving into the steel industry? You said you were in agriculture before. What are some of the things that you've had to adjust to or learn that's different from the previous industry?
Well, safety is huge. So we were always safe before at my previous company, and it was a priority of ours. But, we're in an industry now where things are big and powerful, and that is top of mind. And we're not only safety conscious, we have to be safety conscious year round, 24/7, 365. So it's something that is just, like I said, huge top of mind.
And safety, as you said, is a big deal across BlueScope companies and brands. What has that meant during this major expansion project at North Star? Have there been new considerations to make with regard to safety or looking after people?
I think it's been further refined. So maybe not necessarily new, but how can we be even safer? So it's thinking through things more carefully. It's being very cognizant, attention to detail, focus oriented. And for me, what that translates to is from a recruitment standpoint, we can tell people that, listen, safety, we want you to come to work the same or if not better when you leave us, right? So we want you to go home to your families. This is something that, we take serious.
Yes, and it would be a greater challenge, I imagine, when you essentially have a manufacturing site and a construction site in one. You suddenly have two ways of thinking, really.
Absolutely. And you have different mindsets, and you have a lot of people coming together, people that haven't necessarily worked together all the time, a lot of new contractors. You have all hands on deck, and we're always trying to think of, okay, what's next? How do we be proactive? How do we recognize what these possible safety concerns could be and get them before they happen?
Now, you mentioned recruitment in there, which you oversee that. What can you tell us about recruitment at North Star and bringing people on board? What's it like to join North Star, and what's the culture there?
So, you know what? It's a really interesting experience. We have what I think is a unique hiring process where we are very, very thorough, and we will vet our candidates to the nth degree. So we want to make sure we have the right fit. You can do the job, right? People come to you with a resume, and we can tell if they can do their job or not. But fit is huge. So we have to make sure that they have that safety mindedness that we're looking for, that they have the attention to detail, that they're going to be a team member. We have a screening process where you take a assessment, and we see how much of a team player you are. If you do notice those safety types of issues, we give you like a little sample. And, with somebody wearing a hard hat or their glasses or steel-toed boots, right? So we take that very serious with safety. The culture, I think, is something that's so unique. We have each other's back. And that was one of the things when I joined, I noticed right away. They are like, all hands on deck. Let's help each other. It might not be my area, but we have a helping hand, and we can get this done, whatever it might be. You feel like people are there for you if you need a hand. And that's in any area. It's our functional areas. It's the caster, the furnace. It's everywhere.
Yes, and as is the case with any kind of manufacturing company, I think you've got two different types of working culture. You've got people who might be working within office environments, and you have people who are working with heavy machinery or having to make a lot of those extra safety considerations. So is it a challenge to manage those two parts of the cultures, making sure that everyone's cognizant and aware of each other?
It is, because, you do have people in the functional areas that maybe don't necessarily understand exactly what they do in operations. But one thing that we do is we try to collaborate, and we do these observations every month. And we have 99% participation rates where people will go in and have a mentor assigned to them and go out into the plant and see what is going on. What can I do as an employee to better understand what you're doing and how that impacts my job, let's say, as a functional person. So when we're trying to manage cultures that way, you kind of have distinct roles, but yet everybody has the same goal in mind. We're all in this together. We all want to make steel. We all want to go home safely. So it's a really, really great environment.
So it really sounds like you're fostering a lot of engagement internally so that people understand different departments, different people, different functions. Shifting externally towards the community that is around North Star, what are some of the community programs or ways that you've engaged with people outside of North Star BlueScope Steel?
Yes, so we have a lot of different programs in place. I'll just run through a few of them. One thing that we do at our organization that I really like is we have a lot of decisions made by teams. So we have an activities team, we have a community relations team, we have a blood drive team, we have a social media team. So you have people who are involved, they have new ideas, we get our new people involved, and you have people who take this little piece of their pie very seriously. And so I'll give you an example. During the pandemic, we had people reaching out, well, what can you do? How can you help? We had employees that were doing artwork to kind of display different feelings and emotions that were going on. We had a hospital bed manufacturer that needed help. Well, that's not something we would normally do, but it was something a little unique and different. And so we were able to help in that way. We had some nursing homes that, what can you do to help the nursing home? Well, they needed iPads. They wanted something to have, personal attention and work with just their hands while they were in a nursing home and didn't have visitors. And it was just a little extra something. So we donated iPads. We did meals galore. So we sent meals to first responders, just different community events. We felt like we were really good stewards. And when people brought us things, we took it to heart and said, okay, how can we support this initiative? How can we make a difference?
That is certainly a lot. I've also been made aware that there's a particular program about veterans and family and friends. What can you tell us about that and what's unique about that to your area?
Yeah, we have about 17% of our workforce are veterans. A couple years ago, we passed out some of the flowers that are in recognition with Veterans Day. We did a nice breakfast for all of our employees, the veterans employees, and we did recognition for everybody. Like we told non-veteran employees to come by and congratulate or thank or, just recognize a vet. Then we had COVID, and so we didn't get to do as much last year, but one thing we did that I thought was just huge, we put flags out, one flag for each employee right in front of our building, and wow, was that ever impressive. People walked up and they saw this big, huge area with all these flags, and they were, smaller flags, but still so impactful. And in terms of cost, that was nominal, but it hit home to so many people, and they said, wow, this company really does care.
Well, I can only imagine how many flags there must have been. So just dotted everywhere, you're saying?
We had about 75-ish flags.
So the feeling that people had, it's really fostering a sense of recognition and inclusion within the workplace, isn't it, to highlight this?
Yes, absolutely. You nailed it.
Perfect. So I'm also aware that you have what's called a Leadership Development University at North Star BlueScope Steel. What can you tell us about that and how it's useful for engaging people in your workforce?
You know what? Leadership Development University is a really unique program. We focus our efforts on a group of people that have asked to be a part of the program. So it's an interview process. They fill out an application and they tell us why they want to be a part of this extracurricular activity, because it requires a lot of work on their own where they're doing research and development, and it's in the spirit of being a continual learner. So for me, having that engagement about, hey, maybe I'm not a leader in my actual job per se, but I'm a leader in my role because I can influence everybody. I just need to have a follower to be a leader, right? So I can get somebody on the right path, and if they have questions, they can come to me and I can gear them the right way. So we have about 30 people in the program now. It's a 3-year commitment. So they start out as a foundations group member. They move into, that's for an entire year, they move into what we call an emerging leader program. And then they finish, the final year is in their advanced leadership program. So we have guest speakers that come in from local universities, from well-renowned companies. You might have heard of John Maxwell. We have so many different ways to present unique information. And like I said, help each other in the spirit of continuous learning.
It seems to me that you've left no stone unturned. Everyone's very engaged. And look, Sheri, I want to say thank you very much for joining us on the podcast. It's been a pleasure to have you on and meet you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Martin. It was a pleasure. And you're right. We try to leave no stone unturned.
It's time to hear from Weldon. As an engineer working on the expansion, he gives further information about project management and what was involved to reach the new mill's first heat. He also shares his career experience and what it's like to work at North Star.
I'm Weldon Hull from North Star. I'm the Intech manager currently on the Aristotle project. Roles and responsibilities here are to finish construction of the new melt shop and get it up and running. As we've commissioned it, we've officially made 12 heats on the new furnace. I've also been here for 22 years. I started here as an operations on the entry-level position, and then I went through the craft trainee program to get into electrical. Did that for 10 years, and then moved back into operations as a technologist for the current mill shop.
For 22 years, that's quite an achievement. Well done.
Yes, yeah.
Could you please define for us what IMTech means? You mentioned that it was part of your role.
Yeah, so IMTech is putting the manuals together, setting up the training and completing, putting the equipment together, and then finally commissioning the equipment.
Talking about your time at North Star BlueScope Steel specifically, did you see yourself getting into steel years ago? What motivated you to join the company and become involved in all of this?
So I came here directly out of high school. I found out from a local rec center where they were just having a job fair. Walked in, talked to the guys, and then talked to them, liked the job, ended up here. But yeah, I absolutely had no ambition into going into steel or even what the steel industry was when I was up there looking at the job. But after I came in here, fell in love with making steel. I mean, it's definitely made me who I am for sure.
Made you who you are. That's a big statement. What is it about making steel that you love or that you find so interesting?
The pressure, I guess. You're always under the gun with steel, and you handle things step by step as they come up. And it's an ever evolving manufacturing facility, right? So we put one thing in today, and in 5 to 10 years, it's completely out of date, and we revamp it, rethink how we came up with the idea in the first place. Maybe it's a completely different idea. So even though we're doing the same thing day in and day out, one day here is never the same.
Yeah, that's something that's become evident to me since I've been working with BlueScope. As you've very, very clearly suggested, there's a lot of innovation involved in it. There are things that require a lot of thinking, a lot of review. Things need to be up to date. So that brings us to the idea of the expansion project and taking things further with North Star. Can you give us an intro, some background to the expansion project and what's been involved in getting it started and now executing it?
So where we started, we were looking to make an additional 900,000 tons a year on an 18-month build, which seemed that was mind-numbing at the beginning to think that we could build this whole thing in a year and a half. But even going through COVID, we managed to stay pretty close to the mark. We were a little bit over, but all in all, the build came together very well. There was a lot of problems that we solved on the fly here. I mean, just like day-to-day practices. So we revamped what we were doing, modified it, and then got it rectified immediately in the field. We only missed our mark by about 2 months. I mean, we were supposed to start up in June. We started up on August 15th. So all in all, a pretty decent build considering everything we had to go through, especially with COVID. It didn't seem like much at the time, but not being able to sit down with the construction groups or the engineering groups made everything much, much harder trying to get everybody on the same page of what we're doing. So during kickoff, my initial responsibility was that I communicate to the existing plan on how things were going to go, what the build was going to look like, how we were going to construct it, and give the time frame of when we would be doing things and putting the building up, and as long as communicating how the Denelli furnace was going to work. I guess and simply it was just an initial training on how and what Denelli was going to be doing here on site. That went all the way back to the building itself, the cranes, getting the cranes here on site and getting them running. A huge part of my job ended up being the integration between us and construction. So we hired a construction group, and a lot of my focus went to just coordination between the plant and construction. The construction group that we have obviously has never built a steel mill, so they're very good at construction. Let's say dig a hole here. They can dig a hole and do whatever they want with it, right? But trying to get the furnace up to what it needed to be in a timely manner was what we were after. And that's the thing that took the most coordination. As my role here on site, it was to get our operations, maintenance, both electrical and mechanical up to speed. I got 12 guys working for me directly between the maintenance group. And so my job for them was to get all the manuals together and then do all the training necessary to make sure that we can run this furnace when we do go start up, and then commissioning. So we had to have everything prepped down to work permits. So we put packets together for commissioning. So we spent a lot of time preemptively to put the packets together. And then when it became time for commissioning, all we had to do is pull those packets up and then execute the packet. We did have to work around construction. So everything always depended on how much construction was actually done. So that was another big challenge here is how do you start commissioning while construction's still going on? So we had some pieces that were done, ready to be commissioned, and then everything around it was still in construction. So obviously safety being a top priority, making sure that everyone on both sides of it knew what was going on, what was going to happen, and what was the intended outcome. So that definitely took a lot of coordination for me to get both construction and our guys on the same page, so we were all working collectively together.
Fast forwarding to when the first heat happens, can you explain how significant that is or what's involved for people who might be interested in steelmaking or have never been to an actual mill like this before? Once all these pieces in place, you've taken all those safety considerations and things are essentially up and running. What happens?
So our first heat took about 12 hours. So that started with, so you always have, whenever you start up anything, all these little things, you tested everything independently, everything works, and then you go to fire the machine up and nothing wants to work together. So there was a lot of chasing down little components to make sure that the sequences are right, testing all the sequences to their fullest, making sure that we got water, that the cooling on the furnace itself is correct, and then just the amount of energy that goes into the furnace. So we have a 140 MVA electric arc transformer that we're running off of. Plus we have 8 burners around the shell to inject natural gas and oxygen along with carbon. So that gives us all our chemical energy that we need. So you're trying to balance electrical and chemical energy along with keeping molten metal contained inside the shell itself. So there's definitely a lot that goes into it. It is definitely exciting from an aspect of you just spent a year and a half putting this thing together, and now you finally get to see what it produces, which is pretty amazing to me. I mean, to be able to start that first heat in only a day was very exciting for me, because for me, Rex has been doing this a long time. He's my boss, and he had started up another plant. It took them 36 hours to get the first heat out. So here, to put this together and then to finally kick that off and be done in the same day was pretty amazing.
Now, that's cool. I can imagine you would put a lot of effort in and feel that sense of triumph or relief when all of this finally works.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
What does it mean for North Star BlueScope Steel in the United States to have been able to expand like this?
I mean, it definitely created jobs is the big one. We put in 91 more people into our facility to facilitate the expansion. That was another big part of my job is hiring. HR helps me find the people, but going through all these interviewing all the people, making sure that we're selecting the right people to be in here, because this is a heavy industry, right? It's very tough work. It's hot when it's hot outside, and it's cold when it's cold outside. I mean, you're always battling the weather. But for North Star, I mean, this gives us a huge opportunity in the steel world to continue on with what we do and producing the tons that everybody wants. The way the market is right now, we have people on a day-to-day that are coming to us trying to find steel.
Since you started working on this expansion project and working with these various people, synchronizing with construction, doing the hiring and so forth, what are some of the greatest lessons that you think you've taken personally in engaging with this? Because as I imagine, it's not like normal operations day to day. There's a lot of extra stress and planning that goes into it. So What did you take away from it?
I have grown tremendously over the last 2 years. Reflecting back on what I would consider a problem before seems minor compared to the problems that I've dealt with over the last year. So that's probably the biggest thing is dealing with the issues that have come with construction and getting this built and getting it running. Makes me feel like I can handle almost anything anymore. So, I mean, looking back on smaller problems, I mean, they're easily resolved. and everything's an opportunity. Everything we've done here it's all about a mindset of looking at what can be done, what is possible. And the answer is anything's possible if you put your head to it and come up with a game plan and how to figure something out. I would say the biggest thing here at North Star is the environment of the people. We have a great team that we work with. The whole expansion is based on coming together all at one time and just getting out there and getting it done. So as construction finishes and everything is built, right? So our team will just step in and take over. Right? It doesn't matter how much is done, what needs to be done. They will just step in, get into it, and get it done with. A lot of people want to come back and say, "Oh, this is not done. Let's just wait, and we'll continue this later, and then we'll commission." Whereas our team just come in, they figured out exactly where we're at, what needed to be done, what could wait, and then got the commissioning going and ultimately got it up and running. As for me, my team had to take over as I left. So we had one heat underneath us when I went on vacation, and then they continued on without me and produced another 4 heats with no major issues and got us through some commissioning points and ultimately made a bunch of steel that ended up working out for us. So I would definitely say here our number one thing in North Star is absolutely our people. This is an amazing team, and it is an amazing place to work.
That's fantastic to hear. And I do get that sentiment from people I've spoken to in organising this episode. And I must ask you, if you're comfortable to share, how was your vacation? Did it feel like it had been hard-earned?
It was definitely hard-earned. It was definitely a good break to have. We got to tour around a little bit. Alaska is absolutely beautiful. I mean, it's the countryside, and you don't have to go very far up there, and completely different atmosphere everywhere you go. The scenery changes drastically. It seemed like every couple miles.
Sounds like it's very well deserved. So I hope that you had a very relaxing and enjoyable time away after all of your hard work. So this has been great. Thank you so much for joining us, Weldon. It's been a pleasure talking to you and getting some greater insights into North Star's expansion project.
All right, thank you.
Last but not least, we introduce Daniel. Moving from our Port Kembla Steelworks in Australia to Delta, Ohio, Daniel shares his story and tells us how manufacturing at North Star has continued alongside the project.
My name's Daniel Bridge. I'm the caster LMF maintenance manager here at North Star in Delta, Ohio, which is a long way from Port Kembla. So I grew up in the Wollongong area, went to school, university, and then I worked for a company called Hatch Associates for about 4 or 5 years early in my career, and that was a good springboard for me to do a lot of project work for BlueScope. And eventually I managed to secure a role at ore preparation at the primary end of Port Kembla Steelworks in 2008, which was a really good opportunity. And then I worked my way through a number of different roles there and was successfully promoted to being the CPCM asset manager at Spring Hill in around 2014. And I worked there for a guy named Ray Peters for a number of years. And Ray, about once a week, would talk about this wonderful place he worked at Delta, Ohio, called North Star. And so I was very fortunate. Some years when working with Ray, there was an opportunity to come here to Delta, and I didn't tell my wife about the snow. I told her there was an opportunity in North America. So we signed up and moved my wife, my 3 kids, and our lives here to Northwest Ohio in the middle of winter at the beginning of 2019. And I've been here now for over 2.5 years, and it's been a pleasure to be here. It's just a fabulous place to work with a fabulous group of people.
That's a great story. Thank you for sharing it. And you're dealing with the snow now? The family's happy?
It's really interesting. So my kids have never had any exposure to snow, growing up in Australia, and I had very limited as well. And it's, the guys I work with here, a lot of them, they're a bit over the whole winter thing, because this is what they know and what they deal with every winter, whereas for us, it's still novelty. We still think it's exciting when there's that issue to deal with. But we're just now coming to the end of summer. It's incredibly warm, very humid. Sure miss the onshore breezes that you get in the Illawarra, that's for sure.
Can you give a view as to what it's like in operations at North Star BlueScope Steel? Tell people about the actual facility itself and what they might see there.
I think that probably the closest analogy I would use is the Spring Hill plant itself. So Spring Hill's like a factory in its own right, detached from the main works, and that's what the facility here is like. It's one big factory, all self-contained within one site, but it's in the middle of cornfields. So you drive along on the turnpike, which is the big main arterial that runs east-west across Ohio, and then you sort of get to a point near Delta, and here's this steel mill off in the distance with some only one steam stack coming out of the top, and it just looks like a big factory. But then when you come here, it's a remarkable facility because at one end we've got scrap, the EAF furnaces, and then right out the other end we've got hot rolled coils coming out, being loaded onto trucks and going off to customers. And it all happens from one end to the other in about 4 to 5 hours, where we go from a pile of scrap to a finished product going out on a truck, which is just so different to what you're used to at Port Kembla, which has got so many different processes and separations in the chain between different parts of the manufacturing process.
So day to day in your operational role, what sort of tasks are you undertaking? If I were walking around with you, what would I see?
So I'm responsible for the maintenance of the ladle cranes. So I've got 2 cranes that we look after out there. The 2 LMF furnaces, which treat the heats that come from the EAF, and then the caster machine itself and a water treatment plant that looks after the caster. Well, most of that equipment is contained in a pretty small footprint. So unlike somewhere like raw materials where you've got to walk, a kilometre to get from one end to the other, if I go for a line walk, it's probably like a tenth of that to cover all the pieces of equipment and the locations where my team are situated at when they're out on the floor. So it is very small and contained and very tight fitting and very lean, which sort of leads into understanding some of the challenges we have with the construction project, because you already have this very tight and small footprint, and then we go and open up a massive construction project in the backyard, which has been extremely exciting and challenging for our team to deal with.
Have you had an experience like this before?
No, I think I worked on the op-up project for the Sinner plant.
This is in Port Kembla?
Yeah, that's right, in Port Kembla, and that was a pretty significant project. But this, in terms of the complexity and the day-to-day interactions we have with the construction work and the need for us to maintain 100% reliability and throughput, is very different, very challenging, as well as having to grasp and understand a new manufacturing process for me. It's the first time I've worked in this part of the steelmaking process. Up until this point, I hadn't been exposed to casting machines or furnaces, so it's very different.
And what are some of the things that you've learned from working in these casting and furnace sections?
That being the bottleneck between the furnace and the hot strip mill is extremely challenging. We have a very small tolerance for failure, and when you look back at, I look back at my previous roles where our tolerance for downtime was 0. It's the same here, but I guess the stakes are a lot higher because it's liquid steel. The hazards that come with that and our ability to cope with small problems is a very narrow margin that we have to work within. But we have really great people, we have really great systems, we have some great assets. We leverage them well to be successful.
You mentioned how tight or small the footprint is and how you're running this facility and all these different parts of the steelmaking process there alongside this construction project. What are some of the balancing acts that you've had to manage, and what are some of the effects you've had to deal with, different challenges in having that construction next to what's already running?
It's been a project in itself, being able to work around the project. I've thought about this a lot before we talked today. And so there's been a number of different activities or projects we've had to undertake to relocate and reconfigure our operations and our maintenance tasks so that we could provide the floor space for second cast to get built. So, for example, in the ladle aisle, the ladle bricking team and the gates maintenance team, those guys have been in the middle of this pincer movement around them about with the building construction, extending the size of the building. So, for those guys, just being able to get bricking stock into that area has become this huge deal on how we coordinate that. They've had to deal with mobile equipment like mobile cranes and man lifts and all the construction tools close to where they perform their daily operation tasks. So there's a whole lot of coordination work that goes on to being able to ensure that both tasks can be done safely and efficiently, and that if we need urgent access to something, people can get out of the way. Back in the caster, we had to relocate the tonnage repair maintenance area, which meant We built a new fabrication workshop, moved all of our spares and maintenance team out of their old spares area into different parts of the plant, and then built a new temporary tundish repair area to free up room for the Caster 2 construction to commence.
May I ask exactly, because I'm not even sure I'm familiar with this term, can you explain what tundish repair is?
Sure. So the tundish is it's the vessel that we drain the steel out of the ladle. So we have a ladle with 200 tons of liquid steel in it that comes from the LMF. That drains out of the ladle into this vessel called the tundish, and it's a refractory lined big steel box, rectangular box. The tundish is the source of liquid steel that then feeds into the mold, where we actually cast the steel slab from. So those tundishes, we have a fleet of 10 to 12 of those that we have to manage, and obviously the refractory needs to be maintained, and after each time they're used in the machine in a sequence, they go for some maintenance. We have to tip out the skull material and get them prepared for their next use. And the team used to have quite a reasonably large area to be able to perform that maintenance, and free rein on the overhead crane and free rein on a smaller overhead crane. That's all just changed now. So they're in a different location, much smaller, very little room for all their pieces of gear. And for us to get from the tilt stand, which we use every time we maintain a tundish, the guys now have to fly that tundish directly over the main construction area of Caster 2. So there's this huge coordination effort that goes on with getting construction people clear of that, making sure that there isn't any mobile equipment on the way, and actually letting us get to that tilt stand. And that tilt stand happens to be a brand new tilt stand that we only just commissioned as well. So there's all sorts of issues with getting that up and going and getting critical gear commissioned on that and operational so that we could demolish the old one. So what does that look like every day? That looks like a number of our team members like Corey Williams, Matt Zach, Brett Balsam's bricking guys. There's a lot of conversations on a daily basis, like at the beginning of the day, text chains on what's going on, people on radios, all working together to keep everyone clear about what the goals are day to day so that we don't trip over each other. And we have a vested interest in these guys getting the project done. The earlier they get it done, the quicker we can go back to not having this huge activity in our backyard. And we can get on with commissioning the new equipment and start making more steel.
Is there a significant need to balance things like outages?
Yeah, that's right. So, traditionally for the team here, we come to an outage and, the critical paths and all the interactions are on us. They're our own people, trying to share the crane between maintenance and operations, which is always fun. Or someone might have a really big capital project that, that overarches the timeline. This time we've got to work in with Rudolph Levy contracting team. For example, they have had 2 large steam stacks to put up on Caster 2, which has meant, there's all this interaction work we've got to coordinate between how we do our ladle crane maintenance, how we just separate them out so that no one's at risk of having an object dropped on them. When they open the roof up, it's another layer of complexity around how that outage is managed and how the timelines are coordinated. The other significant issue with that too is that there are some tasks they just have to get done in order for the schedule for the whole project to work. So there are items for us where we have to find a way of making sure they get that done by moving our work around. So it's not just one way where we say we need to do this and you need to understand. It's also, hey, we've got to make sure they can do that lift on that day and building their milestones into our schedule and making sure we've got good backup plans if it doesn't work out.
No, thank you for explaining that. That's really interesting. What I would also like to know about, because you mentioned some of the people who are involved and who you work with, what can you say about the people at North Star BlueScope Steel who you're working with and how you all work together as a team, not just in conjunction with the construction crew you described, but more about the culture at North Star BlueScope Steel?
This is an amazing place, and the people here are just fabulous. Just from my personal experience, I came here, I didn't know anything about casting. I'm an outsider. They don't know anything about me. And the people here are accepting, supportive, encouraging. Everyone works to be the best they can. We've had this project thrown at us, the scope we have to work together in completing. They've risen to the challenge. They've been flexible. They've found, ways of making it work when you wouldn't otherwise be able to do that. It's a tribute to them that we've been able to achieve what we have done in the time frame we have, because if the guys weren't innovative and flexible and hardworking, a lot of what we've gone through just wouldn't happen. It's a joke we have amongst the team where we say there's certainly a large number of us that have been moved into an Aristotle project team environment, but we have the joke that we're all Aristotle because in some way we all have a role to play in making sure Aristotle is successful. So 2 examples I'd use are Ben Bowes and Jason Miller are 2 engineers that are part of my caster maintenance team, and their role is predominantly about just caster-related capital work and projects. But for the last 2 years, Ben and Jason have been doing a lot of Aristotle work in this facilitating and organising and making things happen so that the overall project can still work. We're all involved in some way, shape or form, but it's a tribute to the team here that we're able to do that.
So really it sounds to me like everyone is juggling 2 roles or personas in their work every day. They've got their main job where they're keeping everything going, maintaining the process, but also putting this project hat on, as you said, to bring this whole new thing up off the ground.
That's right, Martin. Down days, for example, there isn't a down day where there isn't something where we've got to make a small change or an adaptation to be able to facilitate the next part of project work. So like Jason Miller, for example, has done multiple changes to how the hot rails are set up in the ladle on the cast roll so that we can set things up to allow RLG to do certain construction work whilst we keep our cranes operating. So it's not something that we necessarily need, but the project needs it. So he goes and does his normal project work, and then you'll go and do some Aristotle work as well. It's really important to reflect on, I've mentioned a few names of key people that are heavily involved in those coordination activities, and, they're team leaders, engineers. I think it's really easy to see those visible people and their contribution. But what I'd point out is that the day-to-day frontline team members who are like the guys in ladle bricking who have to figure out another way of getting their forklift in today, and they've disrupted again tomorrow because we moved the walking path on them because someone digs a hole and we've got to find a way of getting around that hole. I think that needs to be remembered, that if those guys and girls were not flexible and adaptable, that this would not work. I'd like to just point that out, that people need to remember a lot of those people that aren't visible, that are out there every day making steel and making it happen, they're the ones that are, keep this place running and make sure that we have the chance to be able to make the great product we do and return the great profits that North Star's been able to deliver.
Well, look, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast, Daniel. It's been great to get these insights into what actually happens on the ground with operations at North Star. Appreciate your time.
No problem. It's been a pleasure.
We hope that you enjoyed hearing from Doug, Sheri, Weldon and Daniel at North Star BlueScope Steel. We thank them for their time. Visit the show notes to learn more about some of the topics and programs that were mentioned. For other news and updates, go to bluescope.com, visit BlueScope on LinkedIn, or follow at BlueScope on Twitter. Thank you for listening to the Voices of BlueScope podcast. We hope to have you again soon.